Clare, come on up. I'm gonna share my favorite fact about you, Clare. Clare and his wife Susan live in Grand Rapids and are the parents of 6 children and proud grandparents of 20. Do you know all their names?
Pardon?
Do you know all their names?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I have 4 children, and sometimes I struggle with just those 4, so it's impressive.
But not their birthdays. I don't. Yeah.
No, not their birthdays. Okay, very good. Welcome, Clare to Graaf.
Thank you. See, the patch on my forehead had Mohs surgery last week. You know, that is for precancerous things. So every 3 months or 4 months, I go in and they burn or cut little pieces off from me. And by the time I'm 80, I'll be like Danny DeVito. I'm 4 foot tall. So I was born and raised in Grand Rapids, but Holland actually is my second home. We've had a cottage on the lake just north of Ottawa State Park, Holland State Park, for 44 years. So we attended Ridgepoint Church when they met in the Knickerbocker Theater back on 8th Street. So we love being out here all summer, every summer for the last 44 years. Well, to get to know me a little bit better and to save some time, I want to read from the opening paragraph of my book that I wrote called The 10-Second Rule. And it's the introduction. And it says this: up until age 31, I was your standard issue Christian, the kind the Christian schools and churches in our conservative little town pounded out year after year like spiritual Model Ts, mostly in one color, beige. We were covenant children, born and baptized into the church, so we figured we came with a cradle-to-grave salvational warranty. We had our get-out-of-hell-free card. We were in. And in the mid-'60s, every high school senior in my church was expected to make profession of faith unless they were an atheist or Democrat. And I was neither, but I had my questions. And here's why I had my questions. I knew in middle school what my God was. It wasn't he, it was what? It was success. And that was odd because that's not the way that I was raised. I had terrific parents. In fact, I tell people the only gripe I have with my parents is that I can't blame my dysfunctions on them. I mean, they were just wonderful, simple people, no ambition, loved me. You know, they were just wonderful people. I don't have a bad memory of childhood. So they were just great people. Anyway, my dad was a small-time builder in Grand Rapids. He built houses on the 3 streets to the west of Calvin College. And but when I was 10 years old, 1985, I do the math, I'm 74 now. When I was 10 years old, there was a recession of 57 and 58, and my dad went bankrupt, lost a house. We ended up renting a farmhouse next to Calvin before Calvin was there. So my grandkids, I tell that story, and they go, "You're older than dirt." You're right, I actually am. Went to Sylvan School, went to Christian High, went to LaGrave Church, which was an interesting thing. Here we were broke, and it's the church of the Van Andels and DeVosses. And intuitively, I just knew that I would never be happy unless I had power to do what I wanted to do, and that included money. And I was kind of an introvert. I actually wanted to be a forest ranger sometime, but I knew forest ranger didn't pay all that much, and so I changed my careers in about 7th or 8th grade, and I went on a mission to be successful. And because I was so shy, I started selling things door to door, not just to make money, but to learn how to talk to people. I didn't participate in any sports. I decided to give that up and just concentrate on business. So I would go down to Merrill Lynch, Pierce, Fenner & Smith, which was on Ottawa Avenue at the time, and read Standard & Poor Report. Take the bus down. My parents thought it was a little odd. My dad only went through 10th grade. My mother graduated from high school, but they thought it was clean work, so why not, you know? I joined Boy Scouts when I was 12. 3 years later, I'm an Eagle Scout. When we had pancake supper tickets to sell, I tried to sell anybody else. I was so full of myself, I thought I could sell brass knuckles to Gandhi. And I saw my wife in 9th grade. I met her in 9th grade, but asked her on a first date in 11th grade, and on that date, I said, "I'm going to marry you." We've been married 54 years. Yeah. I tell some people that, and they say, "Are you Amish?" I mean, I've never met anybody married 54 years. So, when I was in high school, my father had an opportunity to buy a small machine shop. That's what we actually called it, the shop. And it was a company called Gordon Manufacturing Company. We had 8 employees. We made screws that made office chairs go up and down. In the olden days, you used to have to crank these things, make them go up and down. And my dad bought the business for $10,000, $500 down, but he didn't have 500. I lent him 300 of the 500 down, and that's how broke, they were. But he and my mother managed to make it into a decent business, but they were content. Within a couple of years, this is good enough for us. And I said, that's not good enough for me. I want private jet money. I mean, we're not just a decent income. And so I realized we needed a product. And I'm not an engineer by trade, but I knew that these screws that we sold were 60 cents a piece, and the thing that went on top that made chairs actually tilt were like $10. I said, that's where the money is. So when I was a senior at Calvin, I designed and patented a tilt mechanism for office chairs that eventually became the largest selling mechanism in North America. But my dad found out he had cancer and died 2 years later, so he never actually lived to see the fruits of that. I poured myself into the business. I'm a few days before my 31st birthday. I've got 175 full-time people that work for me, running 2 shifts, 100,000 square foot plant. I'm building strip malls. I am living large. My wife and I are literally taking a jet to Chicago for dinner and come back again. I mean, we were just like, sky's the limit. And a doctor walked in my hospital room a few days before my 30th birthday and said, Clare, you have non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and you have 5 to 9 years to live. And I remember him walking out of my hospital room and thinking to myself, what are they going to put in my epitaph? He made 13.2% on sales. Obviously, something like that really rattles your cages, but at the same time, I started thinking about spiritual things for the first time. And I had been part of the church. I mean, Greg was in my Calvinist cadet. I was a Calvinist cadet leader. I was so unspiritual. I mean, this was back in the day when I was still working on my testimony. I was a decent leader, but not a Christian leader. But I began to notice some people in my church who were turned on to Jesus in a way that I wasn't. So I went to a pastor friend of mine, and I said, what do they have that I don't have? I said, I just kind of always thought they were like the Eagle Scouts of Christianity, and good for them. I just didn't see the point of being overly committed to Jesus. I was in. And he said, well, what they have is a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. And I said, I have no idea how to find that. He said, here's what I want you to do. I'd like you to read the book of Luke, a chapter a day for the next 28 days, or roughly a month. But before you do, I want you to pray this prayer. God, teach me everything you want me to know and give me the guts to live it. And so I began doing that. And he said, now come back in a month and tell me how it went. It didn't take a month. About 2 weeks into that reading, I knew that the kind of person Jesus described as one of his followers bore no relationship to me whatsoever. But I didn't want to be a Jesus freak. I didn't want to have to sell my little Mercedes convertible. I didn't want to have to go off to Nigeria and be a missionary, which in my denomination, that's what you did if you're really spiritual. And, I thought, my friends are going to think I'm odd. I mean, I'm not going to fit in the country club. I had the horrible case of but gods. I mean, and I spent literally 6 months trying to find plan B, a less intrusive, less costly way to follow Jesus than actually following Jesus. And I couldn't find it. It scared the wits out of me, frankly, because I knew enough by this time. I mean, actually, I'm embarrassed to say this. I went to Baker Bookstore and bought the 4 Spiritual Laws because I didn't know how to get myself saved. I grew up in denomination, a wonderful church, a wonderful denomination. I have no gripe at all, but I didn't know anybody who came to faith. We were all kind of born and raised in faith, and so I didn't know how to actually become a Christian. So I was up all night long just wrestling with God. I knew, because I knew enough at this time that I was going to be signing a blank check to Jesus, and it was up to him to fill in the cost. And that is a risk-adverse person like me at that time. That just was like over the top. But I knew there just wasn't any plan B. So I just said, God, I'm all yours, whatever that takes. I didn't have any epiphany. I didn't have any bells or whistles, no angel, no light, no anything. I've been going through chemotherapy every other week, every third week during that time. I continued actually 2 courses of chemotherapy over a 3-year period of time. But I did notice that almost immediately I had an insatiable appetite for the Bible. I began reading the Bible hours every day. I called pastors and paid them to tutor me. I wanted to understand Calvinism, Arminianism. I'm the kind of guy that if I was going to sell something, I wanted to know my product. So I was still in the flesh, learning, trying to figure this whole thing out, what it meant to follow Jesus. And I felt like I was just so far behind the curve. So anyway, 3.5 years later, my management team came to me and said, we're really profitable, we're doing incredibly well, but your head is not in this anymore. I'd had 2 other patents, and you're not even working on anything anymore. We think you ought to sell the business, because I own 97% of the business, and the 3 other people owned the other piece of it. So 1984, I was 35 years old. I sold the company to Liggett & Platt, which is an employer in this area, and they're on the New York Stock Exchange, and I was out of work. So I haven't had steady work in 37 years. So I think that's kind of why Eric has asked me to come talk to you. But it's really important for me when you say one person can make a difference. The rest of what I'm about to tell you is that one person was Jesus who made the difference. So everything else I've done since that time that really mattered is because of Jesus. So since that time, I've had an interesting life because I've had the economic freedom, the theological curiosity, the health. I obviously didn't die at 40. To kind of do whatever I want to do. And so for 3 years, I did church planting in Ukraine in the early 90s. I had an office in Kiev. So when you see these pictures of Bucha and places where battles were taking place, I remember having dinner there and worshiping in these places. Did hospital rehabilitation for a number of years in Albania. 25 years ago, the other guy and I'll tell you that story in a few minutes, started a ministry to translate the Bible into sign language, because he told me, which was true, there wasn't a single book of the Bible in any sign language in the world, including American Sign Language. I thought, oh, that just can't be. So today we have 200 full-time people, campus in Kenya, campus in India. We have staff all over the world. I took a hiatus from that 6 years ago to again team up with another guy. And by the way, when I say these are things that I've done, in every case, God has brought me really gifted people that had a great idea, and my opportunity, my job was to come alongside of them and just help them be successful. So every person I'm going to describe who is the actual president of it was the brains of the outfit. I would just help them put some things together, and I'll tell you a little bit about how that happened. But anyway, I took this opportunity 7 years ago to study the whole LGBTQ issue, and started writing because I didn't know much about it, and my grandkids were heading off to college, and I said, I need to have a thoughtful biblical response to this. So we started a ministry called the Center for Faith, Sexuality, and Gender, and from a conservative biblical position, historical position, but we want to teach pastors how to teach their people to be more kind and understanding and thoughtful with LGBT people. So let me just give you a little bit of some things that I did well that I think helped set up what I do now and what I'm doing in the future. And in fact, ironically, my wife asked me last night, when are you going to retire? Because I was belly aching about something that wasn't getting done. I said, well, why would I do that? I'm having fun yet. I still work 4 days a week. If you want to travel, I'm happy to go wherever you want. We're going to go on a river cruise to France next year. And I said, if you want to spend a few weeks someplace, that's fine. But I don't want to get up every day and just kill pleasantly in a warm place. That's not my idea of retirement. So a couple things that I did after I sold my business that now I am incredibly grateful I did. First of all, we put the majority of the money, more than half of the proceeds of the sale, in a foundation. Not because I'm so virtuous or so generous, but because it scared the wits out of me to have that much money. I mean, that was private jet money. And it was like, I would be tempted to have a third house or a fourth house or whatever it is. So when people say to me today, well, when are you going to get a place in Florida? I don't say this to them, but we really can't afford a place in Florida. And so I don't have to pray about it. I don't have to wrestle with my conscience. Well, maybe I can let my pastor and the missionary use it. That way I can justify, assuage my guilt over, if you've gone through all of that dog and pony show. I don't need to do that. We just can't afford a third place in Florida. So we've rented it for a couple weeks sometime, but that also kind of painted me into a corner because, well, then if I'm going to stay in Grand Rapids, what am I going to do? So I can still be an elder in my church, which I've been 3 or 4 times because I'm around. And, I'm the oldest elder around because everyone else is gone. So that helped me also. I opened an office and I hired a woman who was a great financial person and someone to do some of my help so that all the organizations that I helped start, I could actually provide all the back office work for them. So that when we start an organization, fine. Diane, would you please set up the books for them? Would you get the web page? Would you take care of all of that? I could underwrite, or we could underwrite, our foundation could for the first year or two operating expenses. Because most ministries spend the first 2 years raising money 80% of the time, don't actually do the thing that you want them to do. So I just tell a really smart spiritual person that I found, listen, you just go do it, and I'll figure out how to make the money, I'll pay the bills. You just go start doing it, and once we get up and running to where we're confident, there'll be plenty of people who will want to back this ministry if we are actually able, by the grace of God, to do this kind of thing. And so I'm going to wean you off from me financially the second and third year, but in the meantime, just go do it. And so it gave us tremendous flexibility there. The other thing is, I want to thank, this sounds like a suck-up thing, but the Ron Blue Company, we went to them 30 years ago in Grand Rapids, maybe 26 years ago, something like that, and we put ourselves on a budget. And my wife said, well, why do we need to be on a budget? She said, how much money do we spend every month on ourselves? And I said, I have no idea. I just gave all my bills unopened to my assistant. She paid it. And we were giving away more than half of our. So how can that be bad stewardship? Well, it can be bad stewardship because I don't need this much to live on. And I listened to Ron Blue's book, Finishing. Yeah, I'm getting old. I don't remember the name of the book anymore. But if you ask the Ron Blue people, though, generous living. And so we set a finish line. And it's kind of an odd concept. 3 years ago, Jim Daly asked me to come up to Arcadia Bluffs. They had about 100 of their major donors up there and wanted me to give a talk. So I talked about how much is enough. And at the end of the talk, someone says, well, how can you know how much is enough? And I said, you boys really shocked me. I mean, you aren't here because you just won the lottery. You got a lot of money, you're owners, business owners, and everything else. I doubt if any of you have any problem figuring out how much is enough for the people who work for you or the people that work for the ministries that you serve on the boards of, but for yourself is some unknowable mystery of the universe. It's not, Just set a number. You may be off by $50,000 a year. I don't know, but if you fast and pray and ask God for some guidance, you can say, this is enough, and shame on me if I need more. Anyway, I didn't mean to get into all of that, but you end up painting yourself into a corner because you eliminate some lifestyle choices. So the first year that we put the Ron Blue budget in place, we didn't go on spring break, and our kids came to us and said, why aren't we going on spring break? They were married by that time, but I said, leave and cleave. That's what that actually means. But why aren't we going on spring break? And I says, well, we're doing some things at the cottage and we can't afford it. The next week, three of the kids came over to the house and said, are you going broke? I said, no, we're not going broke. Anyway, so making some of those choices narrowed other choices and kept me from being distracted by just stuff. I mean, I still have a problem with too much nice stuff, so I'm not a poster child for that. Two other things. I got an accountability group, which is like my personal board of directors. There's 5 men, plus myself, who meet most Mondays for 30 years. These are the men who will tell me if the emperor's got no clothes. Claire, you have a problem. I saw how you talked to your wife. I heard this about you. I also want to cheer you on. How can I help you? So if you want to know about how to set that up, you can go to my website, claretograph.com. There's a download called Accountability. It's like an 8-page thing on how to start one of these groups. But for me, that group has kept me straight. For as reasonably straight as you can for a Hollander who's still type A, strong-willed, driven, But they've kept me they've been my guardrails to driving off the ramp. The third thing I did is I tried to take every year at least 2 days, all by myself, to do a personal report card from God. I asked myself the questions God should or would if he was right in front of me. Have I been a good investment for God this year? When I get done, my report to myself from God reads like the book of Revelation, the first couple of chapters, where it says, this I found pleasing in you, and this I found wanting in you. And so for me, that's just taking the time to say, okay, just because I'm accomplishing a bunch of stuff doesn't mean I'm necessarily a righteous man. Am I as good on the inside as I am on the outside? And there's some years that I'm not. And there's some months that I'm not. And so I haven't got this nailed. But those are at least 3 things I put in place that are kind of give me an infrastructure, a spine for my life to give it form and structure. But right now, I just want to talk about this is the throw your brains out the window part of this talk. Because I wrote a book called The 10-Second Rule. 10-second rule is just do the next thing you're reasonably certain Jesus wants you to do, and do it quickly before you change your mind. So you don't have to be certain God wants you to do something, because the search for certainty is almost always the enemy of obedience. Because we want to be certain that keeps us from actually doing something. It's interesting. I don't need to be certain something's a sin for me to want to do it. But doing something good, I feel like, I need to pray over this and pray over this. And my disclaimer is don't ever use the 10-second rule to decide who you're going to marry, what you're going to invest in, whether you're going to adopt a child. Those are, this is for more of these simple things that God is asking, I think God is asking me to do, asking you to do on a daily basis. And maybe they will turn into some of those things, and that's where I want to go here. So years ago, before I even knew about the 10-second rule, I knew this about myself. I was risk adverse. And almost everything Jesus ever taught was counterintuitive. You heard this morning, Jesus says, give to everyone who asks of you. Forgive 70 times 7, go to kind of thing. And I knew that I needed to train myself to be more spontaneously obedient. So I started just picking up hitchhikers. My wife said, you're nuts. I mean, I have to be a little careful. I profiled some of them. If they looked like the kind of people that had a chainsaw in the knapsack, then I didn't. But I did. And some of them would pick me up, and I'd pick them up, and they'd say, why did you pick me up? And I said, well, I'm trying to obey the 10-second rule. And they said, what's that? I mean, nobody can let that go. And so I says, well, I'm trying to be more like Jesus. And I just sensed that I ought to pick you up. So I have no idea. Maybe all he wants me to do is give you a ride to wherever you're going to go, or there's something else for us. 99% of those is the ride, or I share my testimony, ask about their story. Sometimes, just last week, I had lunch with a guy who I actually picked up in Holland, Michigan, almost 30 years ago. His name is Rob. We have dinner or lunch about once every 2 months. All that time, he's bipolar, spits his food, was literally homeless. We got him into an apartment. About, 15 years ago, my son, I invited my son out to dinner with Rob. And we got done, and we dropped Rob off at his apartment. And he said, "Dad, do you really like Rob?" And I said, "Not yet." And because the point is, when you think about the Good Samaritan, we have no idea that the Good Samaritan, the guy that was beat up might have been a jerk. Doesn't say he actually loved him. It just, he needed help, and so, So he said, "Well, okay, if you really don't like him, how long are you going to do this?" And I said, I'd hate to find out he was Jesus in disguise just to see if I would, So maybe it's just as self-serving as that I wouldn't mind having a guy like Rob on my resume when I see Jesus someday. I don't know. So I've read articles in the newspaper. 10 years ago, there was a guy named Larry Sauder who served 9 years in prison for murder that he never did. The guy who actually did it confessed on video in front of his daughter on his deathbed and then died. He just said, "I didn't have the guts to go to prison." So I called up a lawyer and I said, "I'd like to meet Larry." "What for?" "I don't know. We'll find out what he needs." And so my son Tyler went with me, and as it turns out, I'm thankful he didn't need anything, because I'm still risk adverse. I'm thinking every one of these encounters, sure, shooting, they're going to need a job or an apartment. Yes, that's true. There is always that danger in when you are spontaneously try to follow Jesus. But Jesus said, "If you love me, you will obey me." And when he gave the Sermon on the Mount, it just wasn't a bunch of good suggestions. This is the way I expect my followers to live. So I've made this statement before. Maybe I even said it today. I don't remember anymore. But the risk-adverse will rarely follow Jesus. You have to be willing to be ripped off, too. I've been ripped off plenty. I think probably just yesterday. Because I helped somebody out, and I thought, should I have really done that? Because I didn't ask enough questions. But part of just being a Christian is kind of throwing your brains out the window when it's reasonably certain Jesus wants you to do something. And so if you get ripped off, I've done some things and they turned out poorly. And people said to me, "Well, then apparently that wasn't the will of God." And I said, "What makes you think so?" "Well, it didn't turn out." Maybe God wanted to humble me by failing. I don't know that. We think that if everything turns out the way that we should, what we expect, then that was the will of God. And if it doesn't, it wasn't the will of God. I think God tests us. I think God challenges us. So I just don't have a formula for knowing the will of God or listening to the will of God other than training myself to be more obedient. Because in almost every situation where you're going to be out of your comfort zone, there's going to be this little voice that's going to tell you, "That's not a good idea. This is going to be costly. These people are going to be high maintenance. It won't be just a one-time thing," and all of those things could be true. But when I know I should be doing something, the Holy Spirit is also whispering in my ear, and these dueling voices are going on in most of our heads all the time. And so all the ministries that I've been involved in that were turned into decent-sized ministries started out with just this first-time thing. So the deaf ministry, a guy came into my office or called me and said, because he knew I had done some church plant in Ukraine, he had done some church plant in Ukraine, he said, "I'd like to meet with you." And so I said, "Fine, I'll give you half an hour." And that's my thing, because how would I know who God wants me to help if I don't at least give them time to talk to me? So I said, do you have a half an hour? And he said, I'm meeting with a bunch of deaf people in an abandoned orphanage in Union Mills, North Carolina. 6 families living on one floor. All the men use the bathroom, men's bathroom, because there's a big tarp thing on the roof to keep the rain from coming in. We're just struggling trying to figure out the Bible. And I said, figure out the Bible? I mean, can't they read Braille? I mean, that's how stupid I was at the time, for blind. So I just said, well, can't they read? Can't you teach them to read? And it went on and on. So I said, well, I'd like to meet these people. So I said to my wife, I'm going down to Union Mills, North Carolina. I'm going to meet these people and find out what they're all about. And I spent 3 days with them, and I came back, and I said, I think I found my next ministry. She said, you don't know anything about the deaf. And I said, apparently nobody else does either. I think I got a shot at it. I mean, if these people are sitting there and there's no Bible, it's like, wow. This is my kind of ministry. You almost can't fail, So right now, my latest thing, last couple of years, has been helping homeless families not be homeless. And so it started out, I was on 29th Street at Panera Bread Company, and a guy came up to me and said, hey, I'm staying at a hotel down in Patterson at 28th. Would you help me out? If I don't pay $112, I'm going to be homeless, and my family's going to be homeless. So I said, well, jump in the car. I'll take you back, and if what you tell me is true, I'll pay for that. Pay the $112. So he did, yep. They've been here for months, everything else. So I said, well, look at another 10-second rule. I said, look, I'll buy dinner next door at Smoky Bones. And for you and your wife, I don't think they're ever married, but they had a child. And so I said, all I'd like you to do is tell me why you're homeless. Because, they got billboards all over the place. Gentex, Herman Miller, they're offering free beer to get you to work. How can you not have a job, So I did and met with them, and I found out, they didn't have first month's rent. They didn't have a deposit. They didn't have a steady job. So I said, okay, here's the deal. And I've made this deal to a number of people in the past. I said, look, I'll pay for the next month you being at the hotel. I'll go pay it right now. And if you get a job and your employer calls me, or I can talk to the employer, then I'll give you your deposit and first month's rent. So I'm going to give you enough rope to either hang yourself or climb up it. I said, this is a one-time offer. They never did get a job. Still calls me every couple of months because he's got my cell phone number, of course. But that failure, I thought, well, but what he still told me about homelessness is still true. And so I went around to Mel Trotter, I went to Family Promise, I went to a bunch of ministries, and that was the entryway for me to actually trying to understand homelessness. So now that's how I met Eric, because I was telling Eric that we're buying repossessed mobile homes and rehabbing them for like $15,000 and giving them to qualified families. And so we started out 3 years ago, and we're up to one every 11 days now. Every homeless family gets a free and clear mobile home and all fixed up and everything else. And so my wife said, what happens when you get done, because we're trying to do 100 of these? I said, I think we'll try for 100 more. I don't know. I just don't know. But that's kind of where, that's where I kind of want to end. I'm just saying that by following the 10-second rule or just simply being obedient to Jesus, hopefully will lead us to the point where some of these might lead you into your next ministry. But you simply never know. And I think that's the joy and the mystery of following Jesus. So you're going to get burned. Luke says this, or Jesus said this in Luke, if anyone would come after me, he must take up his cross, deny himself, take up his cross daily, or in the next 10 seconds, and follow me. There's no plan B for coming to faith. It's only through Jesus Christ. And there's no plan B for following Jesus other than following Jesus. And if you find another way, I'd like to know it. Thanks.